Welcome to our Development Tools session featuring Barista and the BDT. This session covers some enhancements in a few different areas. First, we'll review Barista's refactored menu system. Then, we'll introduce the new Barista database type. Switching to Eclipse, we'll show you the performance improvements in the BDT code editor and also take you through the BBJ keyword help and the BBJ code formatter plugins. The Barista menu system has been refactored. The new menu is easier to maintain and contains some nice improvements. At a high level, the redesign eliminated the old text-based files and instead now uses two new Barista administrative tables. Along the way, we were able to fix some issues and work in several enhancement requests. This revision is transparent to end users, save for a new shortcut feature that permits quick launching directly into a given task. For developers or admins responsible for maintaining the menu, the new maintenance form looks similar to the old one, but has a new menu tree that supports drag and drop and makes inserting or moving menu items much easier. Because the new menu now resides in a pair of Barista tables, you can use the existing backup mechanism to spin the tables off into XML files for deployment with your application. Drilling down a bit, the change in the architecture provides several benefits. The old menu system consisted of up to 10 different text files, depending on how many languages your application supported, and now that information resides in just two database tables, one for the item definition proper and the other for the translation of the item descriptions. There was a menu maintenance program, but you could also just work directly on the text files, which obviously opened the door to mistakes. The old model let the user assign freeform IDs for each menu item, which could result in conflicts. The new menu takes that problem off the table and assigns unique identifiers to each menu record instead. The hierarchy and menu display is now controlled with a linked list of those UUIDs, whereas the text-based menu relied on embedded tab characters to control grouping and indentation. So if you did decide to work on the menu via a text editor and got any of those tab characters out of place, it quite often didn't end well. The only real reason for all of those text files in the old menu was to facilitate language translation. The files were the same, except for the translated descriptions. The new translation file contains not only all of the descriptions, but also new fields to translate shortcuts and tooltips. The new menu doesn't present a learning curve to users. Both the menu as well as Barista's role-based security look and behave largely the same. And the menu still supports hybrid execution, integrating menu items that launch Barista forms with those for launching other CUI or GUI tasks. In terms of new functionality, you can launch menu items via a new shortcut field. When in the MDI, you can jump directly to a task by typing in the shortcut, or you can assign a menu item to a user record and launch that task as the MDI comes up, or directly in single document interface mode once the user logs in. Rather than a traditional query lookup, when setting a menu task for the user, you'll see the menu tree. So you have a very WYSIWYG intuitive way to find the task you're after. And you can now also allow or disallow running a given menu item from within the MDI, or SDI, or BUI. The menu maintenance form is similar in appearance to the old one, but is really a different animal on the inside. The new version combines a menu tree with a standard Barista header detail form to show the details about the selected item. The prior version had a tree as well, but this is a much improved version and supports drag and drop, which is a real time saver when setting up menus. The menu tree communicates via namespace messages with the form to keep them in sync. The header part of the form lets you see and maintain the details for a specific item, and the detail section then contains records for the various language translations. Note that this tree manager is a new Barista custom object, so it can be used by any Barista application developer. Once you've built your menu, use Barista's Create Sync XMLs utility to create XML files from the two new data tables and store them with your application so they're available when deploying and installing your app, or when upgrading to a newer version of Barista. Let's get into Barista now and have a look at the new menu. Here's the menu that's running in Barista. We see applications in the top panel and the tasks available for those applications in the bottom panel. As I mentioned in one of the user benefits, the look and feel of the menu really hasn't changed. So, as they say, nothing to see here, folks. Let's move along. What I do want to show you is the new menu maintenance program, launched here from the Barista administration menu. The new Tree Manager class has been used to construct this tree to the left of the Barista-built header detail form. As I select a node in the tree, the form gets refreshed. The header contains the main menu item info. This is much the same as what you would have seen in the older menu form with just a few new options. And the detail grid then is where we can translate the item description, shortcut, and so on. You could only provide a translation for the description in the previous menu, so that's a nice enhancement. You can see how the tree control mimics the actual menu, so you know just how your menu changes will look. If I right-click on the tree, we have several options for managing nodes. Most of these have keyboard shortcuts, which is nice, and there are more options here than in the prior version. For example, letting you cut or copy and paste. This tree also supports drag and drop, which makes it even easier to move things around, especially since I can move more than one item at a time. Or by collapsing these, even move an entire submenu. Another new feature is the ability to assign a shortcut to a menu item. Now that's normally going to be a short intuitive string for a given task. I'll select my Customers node and type in CUS for the shortcut. Once I exit maintenance so that my running menu is refreshed, we'll now have this shortcut field at the top of the menu. And you can also optionally display the shortcut next to the menu items as a reminder. Now, regardless of where I am in the menu, I can type in the shortcut to launch that task. If you're familiar with Barista, you know that I can also jump directly to a task from down here in the History menu, although the history is cleared when you exit the MDI. You may also be familiar with the Favorites menu, which lets each user create their own list of frequently used tasks. This new shortcut option is global, so these shortcuts apply to and can be used by everyone. Finally, you can now also attach a specific menu item to a given user to be launched either as they enter the MDI or directly after logging in as an SDI task. I'll switch over here to the Users form and bring up the Guest user. This menu keyword is where we specify the task to associate with this user. The traditional query style lookup here has been replaced with the menu tree, so it's easy to locate and select the desired task. Let's select the Orders task for the Guest user. Now, when I log in as Guest, the MDI comes up and the Orders form is automatically launched. So that gives me a default launch option. Let's go one step further. I'll bring the Users form back up, and let's check the Direct Invocation box. Now, rather than a default launch, this will set the Orders form to be the only task that Guest can launch. When I log in, the Orders form launches in SDI or Single Document Interface mode, and I never even see the MDI. I mentioned that you can create XML versions of the new menu tables in order to deploy them with your application. That's done here in the Barista development menu using the Create XML Sync Records utility. When you run it, select the two new menu tables, and the menu entries for your application will be copied out in XML format under your application's data directory so that they'll be included when you deploy and install or upgrade the application. One final note, if your app runs under an older version of Barista, when you upgrade to version 21 or newer and reinstall and sync your app, then the first time you launch it, Barista will automatically convert your text-based menu files, populating the two new menu tables, and renaming the old files by changing the extension from .men to .menx. So to summarize what we've seen, the new menu gets rid of up to 10 text-based files in favor of 2 new data tables. Aside from the new shortcut and user direct or quick launch features, there's no retraining or learning curve for your users. Menu maintenance is improved too with the new tree manager and header detail form. The detail section holds the translations for the description and also now for the shortcuts, tooltips, and so on. And like other Barista administrative data, you can create XML files for the menu records so you can deploy your new menu with your application. And remember, when you're upgrading from an older version of Barista, it will take care of automatically converting those text-based menu files for you. In a successful collaboration between the database and Barista engineers, the SQL engine and Enterprise Manager now work directly with Barista databases. To understand what that really means and why it's a good thing, let me give you some background. As a framework for developing graphical applications, Barista has always made use of what I'll call a superset dictionary that stores not only the basics of a data table, column definitions, indexes, string template, and so on, but also lots of other information to describe graphical and behavioral attributes used to create and control forms. Things like control types, column labels, tab positions, validation rules for dates or foreign key fields. Barista also uses the BASIS JDBC interface for its own query subsystem and to allow access to Barista from third-party tools. That meant using the SQL engine, but the SQL engine needed to work with an enhanced BASIS dictionary. As a result, Barista had to maintain both its own dictionary and then continually export the pertinent bits of that superset of information over to a BASIS data dictionary. Now, Barista had tools for doing that, but it involved extra steps and took time, and it was a one-way flow from Barista to the BASIS dictionary. If you made a change directly in the BASIS DD, Barista wouldn't know about it. Clearly, there was room for optimization here, so a collaborative effort got underway, and we now have the new Barista database type. Each copy of Barista, whether that's the initial download from BASIS or a separate instance you create using the Barista install manager, has its own database and data dictionary. As of version 22, if you look at that database in Enterprise Manager, you'll see that it's listed as a Barista type. In other words, you don't define a Barista database directly in Enterprise Manager. Barista does that, but it's now recognized as a Barista type instead of enhanced. The SQL engine goes directly to Barista's superset dictionary and uses that metadata rather than requiring a separate BASIS DD. Barista no longer needs extra processes to keep its database and a separate BASIS dictionary in sync. So we gain efficiency and accuracy and lose complexity. And even though the SQL engine is working from a new set of tables rather than those you would previously have found in the bbdict folder, to you, the developer, it's pretty transparent. SQL, JDBC, full-text indexing work just the same as they do with an enhanced database. Let's switch over to Barista for a quick demo. Since this enhancement is more about what doesn't take place anymore, it's more of a tell than a show, but I think it's worth a look. In Barista table maintenance, we set up the basic information for a table, the name, location, and the columns. But if we drill down into the columns, we see that we also have some graphical and behavioral attributes related to those columns. Looking at the customer ID element, we specify the control type, label, validation, so on. Also, if I look at this table in Barista's Form Manager, you see a representation of the running form. There are several more dictionary tables to store all of these attributes: positioning, tab order, read-only fields, default values. So you get the idea here when I refer to the Barista dictionary as a superset. This is way more info than the BASIS data dictionary holds, so Barista clearly needed its own dictionary. What this has always meant is that Barista has had to export that subset to the BASIS Enhanced Dictionary to facilitate the SQL side of things. Those exports were sprinkled throughout the framework. For example, here in table maintenance, if I change a table, I need to select this Create Update Table option. Sometimes I need to rebuild the physical table if I've added a new field or a new key, and sometimes I may just need to change the table template. In the past, this process also then had to export the changed definition out to the BASIS dictionary, and now that process has been eliminated. While Barista was pretty good at keeping its dictionary in sync with the corresponding BASIS DD, there were times when developers found they needed to refresh the BASIS DD to get it up to date. So Barista also had a standalone export task where you could select several tables to export rather than having to call each one up individually here from table maintenance. That task too has been eliminated. Another area where we've gained by losing is in the auto-synchronization process. The auto-synchronize is typically used when installing an entire application into an instance of Barista. I'm syncing in the little default application that ships with Barista for testing. It has just one form, so it'll take no time at all. But for an application with lots of tables and forms, like the roughly 700 that are an add-on, it can take some time. The autosync has to flesh out the Barista dictionary for all of the incoming table and form definitions, then build the form, and compile additional business logic that's tied to the form. What it no longer needs to do is another pass back through all of the definitions to export them to the BASIS dictionary. I'll show you this from a different angle by looking in Enterprise Manager. I have quite a few databases, but I want to draw your attention to this version 2103 database. This is an instance of Barista and add-on. It's listed as an enhanced database, and the dictionary location is the Barista bbdict folder. Contrast that with this database. This is the database for the instance of Barista we were just working in. And you can see that in this case, the dictionary location is Barista sys data. It's this dictionary location that tells the SQL engine that this is a Barista database type. In other words, as I mentioned earlier, you don't create the Barista dictionary directly here in Enterprise Manager. Barista creates it, and this location signals to the SQL engine that it's a Barista type. And just to reinforce what we see here, if we look at these Barista instances from the File Explorer, the 2103 instance has a bbdict directory with all of the BASIS data dictionary files. While if we look in the new instance, there is no bbdict at all. Instead, if we drill into the sys data directory, you'll see a few files placed here by the SQL engine, but for the most part, it's working directly from Barista's own DDM files. We've had a look at the new Barista database type and learned that SQL, JDBC, and full-text indexing work the same as before, but do so by using the Barista dictionary tables directly rather than a separate BASIS data dictionary that has to be kept in sync. The result is a more streamlined and efficient version of Barista.
Mike Phelps here to tell you about changes we have made to improve the performance of the BDT code editor in recent months. BDT code editor performance has always suffered when editing large files or dealing with large projects. In part, this is caused by the large amount of background processing that takes place each time you make a change to the file that you have loaded in the editor. All this processing is something we call reconciliation, which includes the tasks that you can see listed here. Basically, the file that you're editing and other files that this file depends on have to be compiled. We have to create JSON information with the state of those files. We have to forward it back to BDT where it's deserialized, and then we construct something called an abstract syntax tree that the editor needs to synchronize the views and to tell what's going on. In order to get you a little bit of relief from this problem, we have implemented a couple of different approaches. We wanted first to get you a workaround solution as soon as possible. So we implemented a temporary fix, and then when that was in place, we embarked on a much longer and more complex multi-man-month effort to refactor some Eclipse libraries that were getting in the way of a better fix. You know about the quick fix that we put into BBJ 19 just before TechCon 2019. We implemented the maximum performance and maximum correctness editor modes that you could toggle back and forth between. Well, the reconciliation process was only done in max performance mode when you saved the file. So the editor was snappier, faster response, things like code completion worked a little better. But on the other hand, in max performance mode, as changes were made to the file, the abstract syntax tree information became more and more obsolete. And this would cause the editor window and the views to be out of sync, and code completion suggestions would get less and less accurate as time went on. You could save the file to do a reconcile and create new abstract syntax tree information. Or you could toggle to maximum correctness mode, which was essentially the editor's original behavior. Of course, then things would be slow again. When that was implemented, we went to work on the longer, much more complex and difficult, but better solution to replace the Eclipse DLTK, or Dynamic Languages Toolkit, with something we now call BLTK. DLTK is a set of open source libraries that the BDT plugins were originally based on. DLTK made it possible to bring BBJ into the Eclipse environment, but it wasn't a perfect solution. And it has blocked us in many ways and prevented us from doing things that we need to do to meet BBJ's specific requirements. In order to gain more control over the editor reconciliation process and be able to do a variety of other things, we copied the DLTK plugins and created the BASIS Language Toolkit, BLTK. This is a more BBJ-centric version of these plugins. You can think of BLTK plugins as an interface between the business basic language and Eclipse. You can kind of think of BBJ as a square peg type of computer language, and Eclipse, on the other hand, offers only round holes, better suited for languages like Java or C. BLTK lets us remodel those round holes into square ones that are more suited for BBJ. And now, what's available in BBJ 2110? Forget all about the maximum performance and maximum correctness editor modes. They've been removed. Now we have, once again, a single editor mode that combines the best parts of max performance and max correctness modes with none of the drawbacks. There's no more toggling between two different editing modes, trying to remember which one is currently active. The toggle setting has been removed from the BBJ menu and the preferences. Now you just type and things happen in the background. When a change is made to a BBJ program loaded in the code editor, a document change event is fired, and BLTK allows us to grab each one of those individual events and evaluate it to see exactly what was changed. And we can decide, is this change important enough to do a complete background reconciliation, or is this something that's not important? We don't have to reconcile, and we can just use the previously cached abstract syntax tree information and press on. What this means is whenever you request a code completion or enter anything that would cause a new item to appear in the outline or BDT Explorer views, like a new class or a new method or field in that class, or any time that you delete anything with a backspace or by selecting and cutting it, or any time that you add a new line, as you might do when you paste something into your file, a full reconcile will be performed. However, anything else that you enter in is not critical. Therefore, there's not going to be a reconcile. 99% of the code that you type in, or the things that you might enter, there's no need to recompile, reconcile everything again. Also, when you save a file in this new situation with BLTK, saving is back to its original speed. That doesn't any longer trigger a reconcile as we made it do in the old max performance mode. BLTK has kind of opened the floodgates to all kinds of additional improvements that we'll be telling you about in days to come. And we'll be extremely excited to tell you about some of these things as we get them ready to go. So stay tuned.
There are a number of plugins to the Eclipse IDE that can help you be more productive in how you develop your BBJ programs. One of those plugins we want to look at next is called the BBJ Keyword Help plugin. And what it does is it gives you access to keyword help. The BBJ Keyword Help plugin enhances your ability because it saves you time jumping from your code to keyword help and back and forth. What exactly does it do for you, though? It's a plugin for the Eclipse IDE. It provides access to BASIS online help on BBJ Keyword. So basically the same help pages you would be able to access directly from our help search page. It displays a list of available help topics that can open in a browser and lets you choose which, if any of those, are the ones you actually intended to find out about. So what exactly does the plugin do for you? Well, it basically enables you to do the following things: to go directly from your code or from entering text as you type to the help page for BBJ Keyword. Search for and access BBJ help directly from inside of Eclipse. So you don't have to switch back and forth. You can work completely from inside of the Eclipse IDE if you wish. It allows you to view help in an Eclipse tab or in an external web browser, whichever you prefer. So let's look at the 3 ways that you can access BBJ Keyword Help from inside of Eclipse. To get help on keywords in an editor, and by that we mean a BBJ code editor that is open on a BBJ source file in BDT, the way you do that is each time the input cursor, meaning the mouse cursor that click the input cursor from the text, is in the active BBJ editor and it moves, the BBJ Keyword Help plugin has a view that it displays to you called the BBJ Keyword Help view. And that view updates the list of topics that it thinks relate to where you put the cursor. We'll see what that means more precisely in just a moment. For example, if you look on the right-hand side, you'll notice that there's a capture from a BBJ code editor on the far right. You'll notice that the input cursor is that little vertical grayish black bar is on the word BBJ API in the editor. And below that, you'll see we have the BBJ Keyword Help view being displayed. And in the BBJ Keyword Help view, it shows a list of entries on the bottom that start with BBJ API. The first one is the BBJ API class itself, and then below that you see the classes with various methods in case you wanted to jump to some more specific information. So all you have to do in the BBJ Keyword Help view is click on, say, the first entry in that list, BBJ API, and that will cause an action, and let's look at what actually happens. Let's look at how to use the BBJ Keyword Help plugin from inside of a BBJ code editor. In order to use the BBJ Keyword Help at all, the first thing we have to do is open the BBJ Keyword Help view. To do that in Eclipse, there's a standard model under the Window menu item. There is an option called Show View. Select Show View and then mouse down to Other. This is where you'll find all of the less commonly used views, including the BBJ Utilities ones. And click on Other. Look under BBJ Utilities, which happens to already be expanded here. Select the BBJ Keyword Help plugin view, and then click the Open button. Notice that it opens a new view here in the bottom called BBJ Keyword Help with a little light bulb next to it. And so far, it's pretty much empty. There's really not much going on there, but it's up where we can see it now, and that's the important thing. In order to look at how we're going to use that from inside of a BBJ code editor, we'll need to open a BBJ code editor on some file. And for our purposes, we're going to use this test file I have here, test GUI gridstyle.bbj. When you click in a BBJ code editor, the act of clicking will trigger the BBJ keyword help view to update its displayed list of available help entries. So if you click on, for example, a keyword such as the word declare, we'll notice that down here now there is one entry called the declare verb, and that means that there's a help page available online for the declare verb. If I were to click on something completely different, such as a method called set callback, notice now I see a list of all of the set callback method names, as well as if there happened to be a class name set callback, which there is not, and it lists those here in the window. In this case, let's look for, from our example before, the word BBJ API. So if I click on the word BBJ API, you'll notice that there is now a list of items down here that's fairly long, and all of them have BBJ API in them somewhere. So if I scroll, as I'm doing now, you'll see this goes on quite a ways. There are a lot of entries relative to the BBJ API class. Most of these are specific methods that are available on that class. Let's go back to the top now, and if I double click this entry, what happens? Well, Eclipse brings up an external browser, which happens to be a Chrome browser, and there is the help on the BBJ API class, and it's as simple as that. From here, notice I'm at the standard search page from BASIS, so I'm also able to then go on and search for other things if I wish, but that's how easy it is. Let's go back to our Eclipse for the moment, and let's notice one other thing. You can think, well, what if I click on a word? How about if instead I begin to type something? What will happen as I'm typing? So what I'm going to do now is type part of a keyword. Notice as I typed, the entry showed up. Backspacing. And let's try something more interesting like BBJ sys GUI. I start to type BBJ sys GUI, and every time I add another character, it refines the search. Notice one interesting thing about the entries in the bottom list down here. This is not a starts with match. In other words, typing BBJS does not find only the entries that start with BBJS. It finds every entry that actually has a BBJ-esque set of characters in it. So in some respects, that may surprise you because you'd prefer a prefix type match. But in this case, you get all matches that contain the text that you are typing. So I can type, look until I found it. Let's say I'm looking for a BBJ sys GUI method. I don't have to even type the whole BBJ sys GUI, and I can scroll down and get help on the get last event string method, and voila, up comes the get last event string method on the BBJ sys GUI class. So you're able to use the code editor as a collection of text entries that you can click on, and or you may type in it as you go, and the keyword help will update its list of matches as you type. Alternatively, you can get help on keywords using the view directly. You don't have to work from a code editor. How might that work? Let's see. Type a keyword in the BBJ Keyword Help View's text edit field to access the same help, but without having to either have any BBJ program file open in an editor or have the keyword visible so that you can click on it. So you can use it basically just like an independent search engine to search our help for topics that relate to a particular thing you want to type. This is more useful in some cases. For example, if you type BBJ API directly into the text field at the top of the BBJ Keyword Help view, you'll notice that you get the same list of available help topics below it that we saw a minute ago when you clicked on the word BBJ API in the editor. In this case, though, I don't have an editor open necessarily. I just typed something in to see what I could do it. It's a search engine, and there we are. There is one extra that you get when working from the BBJ keyword help view, and that is at any time that you have a list of entries being shown in the BBJ keyword help view, no matter where that list came from, if you right-click one of the entries in that list, it will insert the text for that entry into the active editor. So if there is an active BBJ code editor, then this works, and it will let you do it whether you type directly in a BBJ editor and highlighted something, or whether you are typing in the views text field that we showed you just a moment ago. Sort of think of it as another type of code completion. To see how this works, we need to run the BBJ keyword help plugin, so let's do it. Let's look now at how you can get BBJ keyword help by working through the view instead of working through the editor. As you remember, if I click in the editor at the word BBJ API, we get the list of matches down here, and I can access help from them. Let's say instead I don't have it in the editor already, but I want to go search for something and treat this like a search window. I will be able to type in this text entry field in the BBJ keyword help and do a search that way. So let's say I wish to search for BBJ sysgui entries. There we have the BBJ sysgui entries, and if I go down to the very bottom, I have one on BBJ sysgui methods. And similar to when working from the editor, if I double click this, up comes the help page on the BBJ sysgui methods. That's exactly as it worked before, except I got there relatively dynamically. Now, one of the things that is also available when you work in the view is there's a special capability that isn't advertised very much, but if I select, say, the BBJ sysgui event entry, and I right-click it, not double-click with the left mouse, but I right-click that entry in the view, which I'm about to do, watch what happens in the editor. Notice that it replaced the word that led up to the cursor with the BBJ sysgui event word that I right-clicked. Think of it as sort of a shortcut to a code completion that is only available based on BBJ keyword themselves. This only works in a couple cases, in a couple conditions. You have to have the cursor in the active editor, and you have to have it at the end of a word, because the model that it's based upon is that you were typing in the editor, say, and you went down to the list and used that searching through the list to complete whatever you wanted to type. Thus, it replaces whatever you had typed with whatever you selected. So remember, it's a right click, it's a shortcut for code completion, and it's just another ability that you get from the BBJ keyword help view. Finally, let's look at getting help from the toolbar. Eclipse comes with a toolbar across the top that has a number of toolbar buttons that allow you to have shortcuts to particular functions and features, and the BBJ keyword help plugin is no exception. It has a button. There is a button called the Open the BASIS Documentation toolbar button, and you see it on the screen there. Looks like a small planet. And if you click that button, it can open a browser on BASIS's help search page. This may help you if all you really want to do is get directly to the larger full function search engine and do your work directly still inside the IDE or outside of it. But if you're just more comfortable searching from our BASIS home help search page, then this is a quick way to get there. Click the toolbar button and it will open that in a browser window. Now, you may have noticed in our demos that in our first example, Eclipse opened the help pages in an external browser. But in that last screenshot, Eclipse opened the BASIS search page in a browser tab that was actually inside of Eclipse. You'll notice it showed up as just another tab in the editor area of the Eclipse IDE. So what was the difference? Well, it was an artificial difference, but let's look at it in detail. Eclipse lets you configure how it opens the browser windows and what browser it should use. So on the right now you see a view of Eclipse's preferences page where we've selected the general web browser display. And notice that in that display, you have the choice of telling Eclipse to use either an internal web browser, and that means a web browser that is hosted as a tab inside of Eclipse itself, or to use an external web browser. And that means to pop up a new tab or open a new web browser as an external application, depending upon how you've configured your browser. You also get to choose for the external web browsers which browser that's available you would like it to use. You can always just say use the default system web browser, and it will use whatever you have configured at the OS level. But also, if you have some installed, which I do in this case, Microsoft Edge and Chrome, then it should list those and allow me to choose one or the other of those specifically if I wish. And then I click apply or apply and close, and in the future, they'll open externally instead of internally. So you have that option and you are in control. There's another Eclipse plugin that we want to look at today that can be really helpful for you, and it's also part of the BBJ Utilities collection of plugins. It's called the BBJ Code Formatter, and it lets you clean up your code to some arbitrary set of guidelines that you wish to specify. Let's see how this can make your code more readable and more maintainable. What it actually does is give you a one-button click way to reformat code that you have open in an editor. The BBJ Code Formatter, it is, again, a plugin for the Eclipse IDE. It does allow you to select BBJ source code file and quickly format it. The output format is customizable through user preferences, and by that we mean you get to choose a set of rules or options that the code formatter should apply to your code or not apply as you choose. What type of formatting can it do? Well, this is where we get down to the important part. BBJ Code Formatter lets you remove line numbers. For those of you who have been with BBJ for quite a while, you know that it's always come with a denum option to remove numbers from your code. And by that we refer to the BBJ line numbers. And you are able to do that from the BBJ Code Formatter plugin just as well. It also will remove line continuations. So that means if you have a line of code that was really long that extended across 3, 4, 5 lines in your file, it will remove the line continuations and return those to a single line of code. It will apply standardized indentation for readability, meaning you can set the size and content type, the character used for your indentations on the leading entries of your lines. It will convert single-line if statements to multi-line if statements in order to make them indentable and readable. It will split multiple statements that are separated by a semicolon into multiple lines. And it can convert all business basic keywords to uppercase. Let's look at the BBJ Code Formatter plugin in Eclipse and see how that actually works. The first one of those options we want to look at in more detail is the one called denum. And in order to denumber a program in the Eclipse IDE and in the BBJ Code Formatter plugin, it needs to know where to find two of the utilities that are installed with BBJ. And those are BBJ CPL and BBJ LST. Those programs are necessary, and you'll notice in that red box on the right, you see that in order for the denum to be fully configured, you're going to have to tell us where to find them. You do that by using the browse buttons for each, and then navigate and select each program as identified there by the prompt. So you'd have to go and navigate to BBJ CPL and the path to the BBJ list. Those programs, of course, are usually installed in the BBJ home/bin folder. You may have them somewhere else, but that would be the normal place you would look for them. The next set of configurable options we're going to look at is the code indentation group box that you see again with that red box around it on the right. And that sets values that the plugin should use when it goes to indent your BBJ code. The first thing you can set is the indentation character to use, and your choices are to either use a tab or space character when indenting. Right below that is the indentation width, which says how many of those indentation characters you want to insert per indentation level. A standard value is 4 spaces. Be aware that 4 spaces is not the same as 4 tabs. You want to specify each as characters to be inserted. As you can see, mine is configured for 4 spaces. The last group box is the largest one here, and we're going to look at the options for code formatting, the actual layout and organization of some of those BBJ constructs. And this is where we'll discuss each one of them. One of the things that we'll do is split single-line if statements, and you can tell it, yes, I want to split them into multiple lines, and it will do that for you. We'll look in a moment or two at an example of that. It also will remove line continuations. We spoke about that before, and that is that it'll string your line continuation segments back into a single line, one single line of code. One example of splitting a single line if statements is the one on the screen there for you, which says if we had the from line, then once we have formatted it with the option turned on, you get the to box, the lower part there, which shows how indentation and line breaks can make your code more readable and maintainable. Here's an example of what happens when you remove line continuations. If, for example, you had the from code in your BBJ code editor that had 5 lines that were actually 4 continuations of the first line, once you have invoked the BBJ code formatter plugin, you would end up with a single line as specified in the to box at the bottom. To continue in the code formatting section, let's look at the rest of those options there. It does convert keywords to uppercase if you like. You can specify that you want all of them to uppercase. It will also split inline comments, which means if you have a rem comment that is on a line at the end of the line after some code, it will split those out to their own line of code. And lastly, the option to split inline label comments is different because it specifies to remove all the inline rem comments that are on a label line to be on their own line, and some people prefer to treat that separately. So once again, let's look at what some of those examples might look like. We have the from for an example of a piece of code that was not using uppercase keywords, and then once formatted, the to box shows us how it would look if all those keywords were uppercase, such as the if and the fi and the next and the then. And you can see for yourself that in some cases that makes your code more readable, and that's available for you to use. Here's an example of separating compound statements, where you have 2 statements on one line separated by a semicolon. The from shows that in a BBJ code editor, and then once you've formatted, the to shows what it would look like as 2 separate lines of code. So how would you actually denum a BBJ program, and what would it look like if you used the BBJ code formatter plugin? Let's look at it. First, you open a BBJ program with line numbers in a BBJ code editor, and then you click the denum toolbar button, which is the one with the red box around it there, on the Eclipse toolbar, and the denumbered program will now appear in the editor. You can save or abandon those changes. If you look on the right, we have the before and after. So the before box at the top clearly has BBJ line numbers in the code, and the after box below that clearly no longer has BBJ line numbers. To generate a formatted output, you do that also from the toolbar, and you use the BBJ toolbar button. You open a BBJ program with line numbers in a BBJ editor, and you click the Format toolbar button, which is the button highlighted in the red square there. And again, the formatted program appears in the editor. Again, you can save or abandon those changes in that editor. And if you look on the right-hand side there, we see that we have the before and the after. And the before shows an arbitrary BBJ source code file, and the after shows the full result of having invoked it with a series of configurable options, including capitalizing keywords, uppercasing them, and so on. And to give you a feel for the changes, remember, if you don't like what you see, you can click the undo button or just close the editor without saving, and you will abandon those changes. We are constantly trying to add new formatting options to the BBJ code formatter plugin, because the more rules you have and the more control, the more useful the code formatter will be to you. So what will you be able to configure soon? What kinds of things do we have on the drawing board coming ahead? let's look at some of them and see what you think of those. One of the things that we've had a request for is to be able to collapse blank lines. So then if you have 5 or 10 blank lines, it'll collapse them down into a single blank line. Removing trailing white space from your lines of BBJ code. Specifying the end-of-line characters so that you can move, for example, between Unix end-of-line characters and Windows end-of-line characters, and using a specified format once you've reformatted the file. These are coming. Keep looking for them in the not-too-distant future.
That wraps it for this session on Barista and the BDT. You've had a chance to see the new Barista menu and also learn about the new Barista database type. You've seen the significant performance improvements in the BDT code editor, and you also learned how to use the BBJ keyword help and BBJ code formatter plugins to get more from your development environment.